10, 9, 8. Go for main engine start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, working on my Rascal, and I've got the fins pretty much done with the fillet of epoxy. One thing I did notice though is it did sink in there a little bit more than I anticipated. So what I'm going to do is instead of doing another thing of epoxy, I'm actually going to do some of my filler putty, which is this automotive glazing putty. This is the red putty. It is not the stuff that you mix with hardener. It is the actual spot putty, which dries on its own. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this. What this is, it's called a dotting tool. And let's see if I can show you there. What this is you can buy these at like Sally Beauty, and it's made to dip into paint and then put on a fingernail, and it makes a perfect dot every time. The paint just wicks off. It's kind of a neat little tool. But what I'm going to use mine for, I've got a set of all kinds of different sizes. So I picked the biggest size, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the putty in the seam here where the fin comes onto the tail cone here, and then I'm going to take this little dotting tool, which is completely round, and I'm going to drag it across that junction. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a perfect fillet all the way across, and it's going to be really fine. If I had a bigger one, I can make it a little bit bigger, but I want to keep everything as light as I can. But I did the other side here. So you can kind of see this one here. Let me get a close-up here. And seemed to work out pretty darn good. You can always use my other techniques of using a Q-tip soaked in this metallizer thinner, and then press that. That makes a bigger fillet. The problem is it's inconsistent. This way it would be always consistent. But you can see it's actually was filled, and then it was sanded down, and so I've got a perfect fillet. And wherever the epoxy worked okay, it just skips over, so it makes one constant line. So like this little dot right here is actually not a hole, it's actually epoxy there that's clear. So anyways, that's what we're going to do next, and I will show you how I do it. So I'm going to take the putty and going to open it up. You do have to shake it, believe it or not. It's got some thin parts and some thick parts. And I'm going to open my thinner. I'm going to take some of the putty, and you can see it's pretty dry, and it dries extremely quick. So I got to be pretty careful with this and pretty fast. So the way I do it is I'll take a little bit of it and I'll put it into that crevice. And you want to put at least enough that when you drag the ball, it catches all of it and doesn't skip. And it will build up at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just a little bit there, since it dries so fast. And I'm going to take my dotting tool and I'm going to dip it in the thinner and then run it across there. And you can see how it makes a really smooth fillet. And then we can clean up the others. So let's do it again, show you again here. Okay, I'm going to get the putty on the tip of the toothpick. Again, there are bigger dotting tools that you can get. That's the biggest one that came in the pack I had. I actually was using it for dotting, believe it or not, on aircraft for touching different dials. Like if I want to put a clear face on a dial, you just touch that to the dial with some clear paint on it, and it wicks right into the instrument. Makes it perfectly round. Okay, make sure we get it around the front face. Okay, now you can use other putties. It's just this stuff I like because it dries pretty quick and doesn't shrink, and it bites into the plastic. So again, I'm going to take the dotting tool with a little bit of the thinner. Oh, see, now it's actually dragging it a little bit, so we'll go back and forth, make sure I get that thinner in there. Lightly drag it. Okay. Yeah, it's getting, this stuff dries so fast. But if you're quick enough, you can keep working it. with the thinner. Okay. Yeah, this side is actually, the back side is already dry. So now the other thing I'll do is to make my sanding go a lot easier, and so I don't risk sanding through the wood, is I can scrape off the stuff that's not in the fillet. And this doesn't stick very well to the wood when you're scraping it. Once it's dry, it sticks really well. So we'll get rid of some of that, just make our life a little easier on the sanding point. And then I'm going to do the same on this side here. You can see there's a little line that separates the fillet from the extra putty. So with a knife you can get in there and just clean out that extra stuff. Plus it will make the plastic dry a little bit faster, because this thinner will eat the plastic a little bit, so it stays soft for quite a while. So I usually wait overnight on this for it to completely dry. The putty will be dry in about a half an hour, but the actual melted plastic takes a lot longer to dry and go back to normal. So anyways, that's what the fillet looks like when you do it, and that's what the fillet looks like when you're done. So anyways, we're still moving on this project. All right, as I'm going around finishing my fins, this fin, as I was talking about, is had a little bit more of a gap when that was the first hole I opened, and I accidentally opened it a little too wide. So the epoxy, if I put it there, is just going to fall right through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shim it with this piece of basswood, and I'm just going to basically make it so that gap is closed enough that the epoxy will work. So I'm going to slide that in there, which is almost exactly the right size, and then I'm just going to take my pencil and I'm going to mark it, and then I will cut it and install it. Okay. Right, and hopefully this will actually work pretty good. I do have a design to cover up that hole on those short fins. There's actually a strake on the real rocket that goes down the spine and into that fin. So okay, we want it this way. Okay, that looks like it's going to work. So I will glue that in, get some actually, let's, okay, put out some white glue here and get it glued in, let it dry, and then we can start working on it here. Okay, so now I've got my white glue there, or my yellow glue I should say. It looks white now that it's on a yellow Post-it note. I'm just going to drag that through and then set that in there. Okay. And then I'm just going to tease it in. If it falls through, that's not a problem. I can always put another piece on. It's just a little thing rattling. So we're just going to make sure it's level. Okay, and just for good measure, I am going to take a toothpick with a little bit of the yellow glue and just put it on the top there. I just want to make sure it's not going to be too much, so I'll take my Q-tip and we'll just smooth it out. That way it's not bothersome to any fillets I put in there. So we'll let that dry, and the strakes are these ones here. I don't have, unfortunately, I don't have them cut to length or shape yet, but that's basically what it's going to look like, and it's going to cover up that hole and go down the spine of the rocket just like so. So got lots of work to do still, but getting closer. Okay, back on the Rascal. I've got my 2 strakes cut, and basically cutting them to 8 3/16. The real rocket, it actually comes up short of where the nose cone is, and about there. And then this will be actually a little bit tapered to fit this fin. We'll just cut it out with a knife or sand it out with a file, one of the two, and then that way it'll flush fit in there and cover this little piece up here. So we'll start filing that and see how well it works. I'm also going to try to mark where the actual wood piece ends here. Okay, I've got my 2 pieces cut, and then I drew out on here the actual shape of the fin. Tighten up on that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my files. I've got some a knife size shaped file, a flat and a round, and I'm just going to gently start scoring it with the file, and the balsa will file pretty quickly. There we go. So we're just going to start working it like that. You can see how it started. I'm just going to finish that, and then we'll fit it every so often. Okay, now that I've got my pieces somewhat set, you can kind of see how they lock in there like so, and then they go up to the front. So these will be tapered and then sealed in. Each side will be tapered like so, and but what I need to do is I need to get them straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my fin alignment guide here, and I'm going to line up my fin unit. Pull that off. Okay, and I'm going to just draw a line. Hopefully it'll be pretty close to being centered, like so. Same on the other side. Okay, that should be pretty straight. So now we got a line to guide us when we glue the piece down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to taper this with sandpaper and taper this down with sandpaper, break the edges here, and then we'll be ready to sanding seal them. Okay, I'm actually going to double taper these. I've got this one tapered from front to back, and now I'm going to actually taper it this way, and I'm just going to run the sandpaper around here and soften that in, and I'm going to do the same thing on here, but it'll come out a little different because it's the little prongs there. Just got to be very careful I don't break those. Okay, I'm closing in on some of the finishing touches on the Rascal, ready to put the strakes in, and just need to make sure which one is which, and that one's number 2, so this one's number 1, and as you can see I've cut out the little notch there so it fits in there perfectly, and then sets down here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this in with some Tite Bond from paper to wood, and then I'm going to leave this back part empty for now, and then well, actually I'll go ahead and do some epoxy on the back side, and then once that's dry I'll be ready to do an epoxy fillet. But one thing I'm going to do first to make sure I get this reinforced is I'm going to treat it with the sanding sealer, get 3 coats on there and get that real smooth, and then I'll be ready to install. Okay, I'm ready to put the strake on the Rascal here, and I've got it all filed out so it fits nice and flush there, and I got the line and everything ready to go. Now I did mark a little line on here to show where I'm going to put the carpenter's glue here and then the epoxy on the other side. I mean, I could use epoxy all the way across, but I figured I'll do the carpenter's glue. Seems to work a little better, paper to wood. So I'm gonna get some of that out, and then we're gonna mix a little bit of epoxy here. don't need a whole lot of epoxy. It's just going to hold the back end area, and then we'll use more epoxy to do a fillet for strength. Okay, so we're going to mix that up, get that epoxy nice and mixed and get it ready. Now I've taken these strakes and I've covered them with sanding sealer, 3 coats, so they're nice and smooth and ready to go. Okay, so now what we'll do is take the epoxy first, since it takes a little longer to dry, and using that mark I'm going to put it on the back side of the wood here, and I'm going to put some down in that little filed area that I made to custom conform fit to the fin, a little bit on the sides too, so I want it to all get a lot of adhesion. Okay, now I'm going to take the carpenter's glue and I'm going to do the rest of it, and we'll do one first coat so it soaks in, and then we'll let that get tacky, and then we'll put another coat on it here. Okay, use my finger to wipe that down, push it into the pores of the wood. Okay, clean up the side with my finger. Okay, give that a few seconds to dry here, and then it's tacking up right away. So we're going to put another coat on here, and this one I want fairly thick, a little thicker than normally I do the fins, just because I don't want this thing coming off here, even though we will be reinforcing it here. Okay, now we're all ready. We're going to put the back end in first, and then slowly push in the front, and it's going to move around a little bit on us because of all that glue, but I'm going to make sure I use that centering line. Okay, now this has a little bit of a bow to it, which is going to make it try to rise up away from the wood's going to try to rise up away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some tape on this to hold everything down where I want it. And that way I won't have as much of a gap back here, which I'll still have probably a little bit of a gap, which I will fill with the epoxy. But I want this nice and tight on here. Okay, so this area here is all flat, but this is the one that's bowed, so we'll try to put a little pressure on it with the tape. Okay, so we'll push it down and tape it in place and see if that's going to hold. And you can see it's got a little bit of a gap there. I could have softened the wood and tried to make it fit, but we'll just leave it. We'll put a little fillet in there. Make sure everything else is holding tight, and we'll let that dry, and we'll do the one on the other side. All right, I've got the Rascal finishing up here. I took the strakes here and I actually put the epoxy on there, smoothed it out, and then I put some putty in there and sanded it down just like I did with the fins, using that ball tool to smooth it out. So those are all ready and done and nice and secure. So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to put a launch lugs on and a couple other things. So what we're going to do is we're going to mark a line for the launch lugs, and we're going to put it right along here. So I'm going to use my little tool here, and I'm just going to hold it steady and hold it even, and then we're going to draw a line to the launch lug. Okay. And then the launch lug is actually 2 pieces. So they actually ask you to cut it in half. So let's measure this piece here, 2 inches, so we'll mark it at 1 inch. And we'll cut that down. Finding my knife here. Okay. I'm just going to take the knife and give it a good slice here. Okay, now what I'm going to do for the lugs, after I cut them, they're a little rough, so I sanded them a bit, but they're still kind of rough. So what I like to do is I take the lug and some super glue, and what I'll do is I'll dip it in the super glue, roll it around, kind of wick it off here, and it'll soak into the paper. And then what I'll do is I'll take a toothpick and I'll just smooth some around on the inside, but I want to make sure that it's perfectly smooth so it doesn't interfere with the rod. And then I'm going to put some on the outside. So what we'll do is we'll get that as smooth as we can, and that'll reinforce where the cut line is. Okay, and then we'll set that aside to dry, and we'll do the other one, and then we'll install them. Okay, I'm ready to install the launching lugs. So I'm going to take some epoxy here. I don't need a whole lot of it, because I will install them with this, let it dry, and then I'll use some more epoxy to make some fillets on the side of the lugs. That way they'll be reinforced. Make sure we got equal amounts there. And we'll mix them together. And launching lugs, I always try to keep a few extras when I go out to the field, because they can tear off and then you're kind of stuck. So you need something to be able to put the rocket onto the rod with. So, okay, so we've got that pretty well mixed. Our half-an-hour epoxy here. And the lugs I don't really have to measure, because they're actually going to go on the back where the tube goes to the plastic, and then on the front, same thing, where the tube goes to the nose cone. So I'm going to take the launch lug and I'm going to apply some of the epoxy. I'm just going to kind of roll it around in the epoxy. Okay. And then I'm going to line it up and put it on the paper there, and then I will line it up straight as I can, and then I will do the other one and make sure that they line up with a piece of dowel, and that way they are not crooked. Okay, now one of the final things I'm going to do on the Rascal is I want to put weight in the nose. The V2 kit tells you not to put any weight in the nose. Not sure why. I thought they used to in the old kits, but anyways, I'm going to put some in there just to be sure. And I've got a little pack of the Estes clay, and it's nice and sticky. But I'm going to add a little more, so I'm going to actually use this plastilina non-drying clay, so it's pretty sticky as well. So we'll add some of that in. Basically another block about this big, so we're going to have 2 of those going into the end. One thing I'm going to do first that I forgot is to get rid of this little hole where the actual clip's going to go for the parachute. So just trying to be careful cutting it out, just making sure not to cut this, and then I'll clean that up, make sure there's no sharp edges. So we'll get that ready to go. Okay, I've got my clay ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to roll it into a little snake here so we can get it through the hole in the end of the nose cone. I've cleaned up the nose cone, make sure there's no sharp edges or anything. So we're just going to put that in there. And what I'm going to do is try to get it down to the front as far as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a stick to tamp it down and push it into that end nose cone, because the further you get it forward, the less you need to balance this out. And what this is going to do is make it so the center pressure is not too far forward. It's going to make the center of gravity forward of the center of pressure, which is going to make it fly a lot better. So I'll roll that into a snake and pack that in there as well, get it real packed in tight, and we'll be done with that. Okay folks, that's about a wrap for the Rascal. As you can see, I've got the lugs on, and all I'm going to do is I'll put a little fillet on those just to strengthen them. That'll be the final thing. But otherwise, everything is ready to go to the paint shop. Everything is on here. The strakes are on here. Everything's really reinforced. I've got those bumpers on there to make these fins ultra strong. I've also got the clay in the nose, so that's ready to go. Might make it a little heavier, but I don't need this rocket to go that high anyways, being a scale rocket. Not going for altitude or anything, but so that's about it. There's the back end of it. Kind of give you a walk around here. The bumper carbon fiber strips there, and there's the lugs and the strakes, and the nose cone. All right, so the last thing I'm going to do, actually, which I almost forgot, is on the cord itself. And let me grab a little piece here, because we'll be putting on a parachute onto that, so hang in one sec. Okay, so I've got a ball bearing snap swivel here, number 4, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this cord on that. How I'm going to do that, I'm just going to take the cord here and I'm going to bend it over a little bit so it goes through that hole, and then we'll just tie it off. We'll do a double knot here. Make sure we got plenty of length here. So we'll do the one knot here, pull it nice and tight. Make sure it's at the bottom of the ring. Okay, so we've got the one knot there, and then we'll double knot it. Okay. And this cord will withstand a lot more than the regular rubber cord. So what I'm also going to do is to keep, since this is kind of slick being nylon, I'm going to take a little bit of my Tite Bond glue here, and what we're going to do is we're going to actually just reinforce the knot. So I'm just going to take some of the glue here, and I'm going to put it on the end, and then I'm just going to smooth it with my fingers to get it in the bits of the knot that are going to slide and slip between each other, and this will keep them from doing that. So, okay. All right, so we'll let that dry. Just make sure to work it in there. It will get a little crispy, so that's why I don't want it on too much of the cord, because then it'll make the cord crispy and possibly break. So what I would do normally is I would take the parachute, and I would have one of these on the parachute side, which I think I'll put a 24-inch parachute on this, and then clip the parachute to that, and then we'll clip it to the nose cone. So we will bring this open here like so. We will put it on the cone itself. Like so. The parachute would actually have one of these swivels, but I want the swivel attached to here, not to here, not to the nose cone. Because if this nose cone piece breaks, if the parachute was attached to that, parachute would go flying separate, nose cone would fly separate, and the body would separate. So if I have the parachute here and the nose cone separates, all I'm going to lose is the nose cone. Parachute would still be attached to this, and the rest of the body should recover just fine. So anyways, that is about a wrap on that one, and appreciate you watching, and hope things are going well. And we'll give this a try. We'll paint it up is the next step, and then we'll give this a try at flying and see how well it works. Till then, keep on building.